In my 30-plus years on the bench, I've seen thousands of cases, but every once in a while a case comes before me that reminds me why I do this job. This is one of those cases, and I want to share it with you because it's not just about law, it's about love, accountability, and what it means to be a parent. Let me tell you about a morning in my courtroom that I'll never forget. It was a Tuesday in March, and I was reviewing my docket when a particular case caught my attention. The state of Rhode Island versus Madison Claire Reeves, 19 years old, charged with assault and battery on a disabled person. Now, when I see disabled person in the charges, I pay special attention. These cases involve our most vulnerable citizens, and they deserve extra care. I read through the file. The victim was Eleanor Walsh, a 58-year-old high school English teacher who walks with a cane because of multiple sclerosis. The facts were disturbing. 5 days earlier, at a local grocery store, this young woman had pushed past Mrs. Walsh in the checkout line. When Mrs. Walsh politely asked her to wait her turn, the defendant allegedly cursed at her and shoved her to the ground. Mrs. Walsh hit her head on the floor, dislocated shoulder, concussion, 3 days in the hospital. But here's what really troubled me. According to 4 witnesses, after knocking this disabled teacher to the ground, the defendant stood over her and said, "Maybe next time you'll move faster, lady." And when the store manager threatened to call police, she laughed and said, "Go ahead, my mother is FBI. Nothing's going to happen to me. My mother is FBI. Nothing's going to happen to me." I've been doing this long enough to know that sense of entitlement when I see it, and I knew this case was going to be about more than just assault. It was going to be about privilege, accountability, and whether someone's family name puts them above the law. At 11 o'clock, the bailiff called the case. The courtroom was packed. Teachers from Mrs. Walsh's school, disability advocates, concerned citizens. There was an energy in the room, like everyone knew something important was about to happen. Then Madison Reeves walked in. Now, I try not to judge people by their appearance, but body language tells you a lot. This young woman walked into my courtroom like she was walking into a mall. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, checking her phone until her attorney took it away, and that look on her face, not nervous, not remorseful, contemptuous. She had one of Providence's most expensive defense attorneys with her, Catherine Morgan. I've seen Catherine get wealthy clients out of tough situations before, but I had a feeling this case was going to be different. When Madison passed the row where Eleanor Walsh was sitting, this dedicated teacher with her arm still in a sling, her cane beside her, Madison didn't even glance at her. No acknowledgement, no sign of remorse, nothing. That told me everything I needed to know about where this young woman's heart was. I looked up from my paperwork and said, "Ms. Reeves, you're charged with assault and battery on a disabled person. How do you plead?" Her attorney jumped up immediately. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty. We believe—" I held up my hand. "Counselor, I asked your client, Ms. Reeves, do you have a voice?" Madison stood up, flipped her hair back and said, and I remember this exactly, "Not guilty, Your Honor. This is totally overblown." Totally overblown. A disabled teacher in the hospital for 3 days is totally overblown. I took off my glasses. When I take off my glasses, my staff knows I'm about to deliver a reality check. "Ms. Reeves," I said, "I've reviewed the security footage showing you shoving a disabled teacher to the ground. I've read the hospital reports detailing her injuries. Would you like to reconsider calling this totally overblown?" And this is where it got worse. This young woman looked at me with that same entitled expression and said, "Your Honor, I barely touched her. She's probably exaggerating to get money or something." These people always do. These people always do, the courtroom gasped. I felt my jaw tighten. In 3 decades on this bench, I've tried to be patient, to be understanding, to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. But there are moments when you realize you're not dealing with someone who made a mistake. You're dealing with someone who fundamentally doesn't respect other human beings. I needed this young woman to understand who she had hurt, so I said, "Miss Reeves, before we proceed, I want to understand something." The disrespect was staggering. I looked over at Eleanor Walsh, sitting there with such dignity despite what had been done to her. I stood up and walked to the front of my bench. When I do this, everyone in the courtroom knows something significant is about to happen. "Mrs. Walsh," I said gently, "would you please stand and tell Ms. Reeves who you are?" Eleanor Walsh stood slowly, using her cane for support, and what she said next made me proud to be in the same room with her. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady, "my name is Eleanor Walsh. I've been teaching English at Providence High School for 30 years. I've taught over 4,000 students, including children of immigrants, foster children, students with learning disabilities. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 12 years ago, but I refused to stop teaching because I believe education changes lives." She paused, and her voice strengthened. 5 days ago, this young woman attacked me in a grocery store for asking her to wait her turn in line. I suffered a concussion and dislocated shoulder, but the worst injury wasn't physical. It was hearing her mock my disability and tell me I was exaggerating. The courtroom was silent. I nodded respectfully, and Mrs. Walsh sat back down. I turned to Madison. Ms. Reeves, do you understand what you just heard? You assaulted a woman who has dedicated her life to educating children, a woman who continues teaching despite a debilitating disease, and you called her injuries exaggerated. Madison's smirk was fading, but she still tried to defend herself. Your Honor, I didn't know she was a teacher. I didn't know she was sick. Ms. Reeves, I said, and I wanted her to really hear this. It shouldn't matter what her profession is or her medical condition. Assault is assault. But the fact that you think it would only matter if you knew these details tells me everything I need to know about your character. Her attorney tried to intervene, but I wanted everyone to see the truth. I had the clerk play the security footage. We all watched as Madison, clearly visible on camera, aggressively shoved Eleanor Walsh, who fell hard to the floor. Madison stood over her, clearly saying something, though there was no audio, then laughed before walking away while others rushed to help the fallen teacher. When the video ended, I looked at Madison. Still think you barely touched her? Her face had gone pale, but she said, Your Honor, I was stressed. I had a lot going on. I wasn't thinking. That's when I'd had enough. You were stressed? I said, my voice rising slightly. Ms. Reeves, I've seen people who've lost everything, their homes, their jobs, their families, come before me. You know what they don't do? Attack disabled teachers because they're having a stressful day. I walked closer to her bench. Let me tell you what I think happened. I think you've spent 19 years believing you're special. I think your mother's position with the FBI has given you a sense of immunity. I think you've never faced real consequences, and I think you came to my courtroom expecting that pattern to continue. She tried to interrupt, but I continued. I've dealt with people like you before, Ms. Reeves, people who think their parents' badge, their family's money, their last name makes them untouchable, but in my courtroom, none of that matters. What matters is justice. Now, here's where this case became something I'll remember for the rest of my life. I had noticed a woman sitting in the back corner of my courtroom, civilian clothes, no badge visible, but there was something about her bearing, her posture, that told me she was law enforcement, and I had a feeling I knew who she was. Agent Reeves, I called toward the back of the courtroom, would you please come forward? The entire courtroom turned. Madison spun around, and for the first time since entering my courtroom, her arrogance completely shattered. Mom, she said, her voice cracking, why are you here? Walking down the center aisle was a woman in her mid-40s, FBI Special Agent Maria Reeves. No uniform, no credentials visible, just a mother watching her daughter self-destruct. Agent Reeves, I said, thank you for being here. I know this must be incredibly difficult. She stood with perfect posture. Your Honor, thank you for allowing me to be present. Madison was panicking now, and honestly, I felt for her in that moment, but sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone face the truth. Agent Reeves, I said, your daughter seems to believe that your position will protect her from consequences. She's implied that because you work for the FBI, she's somehow above the law. I'd like to give you an opportunity to address that belief. The courtroom held its breath. I've been in this position before, asking a parent to choose between protecting their child and upholding justice. It's never easy, but it's necessary. Agent Reeves took a deep breath, and when she spoke, I heard 20 years of federal service in her voice, steady, principled, unwavering. Your Honor, my daughter is wrong. She has always been wrong about that. I've spent 20 years with the FBI investigating organized crime, public corruption, civil rights violations. I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution and to uphold the law. That oath doesn't come with an exemption clause for my family. Madison tried to speak. Mom, please. Agent Reeves held up her hand with an authority that silenced her daughter immediately. Madison, be quiet. She turned back to me. Your Honor, I watched the security footage the day after the incident. I saw what my daughter did to Mrs. Walsh. I've read the medical reports. I know exactly what happened. Her voice cracked slightly, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. I'm here today not as Special Agent Reeves, but as Maria Reeves, a mother who apparently failed to teach her daughter basic human decency. What Agent Reeves said next is why I'm sharing this story with you. She looked at her daughter, tears now streaming down her face, and said, Madison, I raised you alone after your father died when you were 5. I worked double shifts. I missed soccer games and school plays. I sacrificed time with you to protect people and uphold justice. And somehow, despite everything I tried to teach you about right and wrong, about treating people with respect, about using whatever privilege you have to help others, you became this. Madison was sobbing. Mom, I'm sorry. You're not sorry yet, Agent Reeves said firmly. You're scared. There's a difference. Then she looked at me and said something that I've thought about every day since. Your Honor, whatever sentence you deem appropriate, You have my complete support. My daughter assaulted a disabled teacher. She showed no remorse. She disrespected this court, and she disrespected the values I've built my career on. She deserves to face the full consequences of her actions. In fact, Your Honor, I would ask that you not show her any leniency on my account. She needs to learn this lesson now while she's still young enough to change. The courtroom erupted in whispers. A federal agent asking me to deliver the harshest sentence to her own daughter in 30 years on the bench. I'd never seen anything like it. Madison was crying uncontrollably now. "Mom, please," I said, "I'm sorry." Agent Reeves turned to her daughter. "Madison, I love you more than anything in this world. You're my only child. But love doesn't mean protecting you from consequences. Love means making sure you become the person you're capable of being, and right now you're not even close." She wiped tears from her own eyes. "Do you know what I did after I saw that video? I went to Mrs. Walsh's home. I apologized to her for what you did, even though I knew it couldn't undo the harm. And do you know what she said to me? She said, Agent Reeves, your daughter doesn't need protection. She needs accountability, and she needs to learn that the world doesn't revolve around her." She was right. I stood there for a moment looking at this federal agent who had just made one of the hardest choices a parent can make. I've been a father. I understand that instinct to protect your children. But I also understand that real protection sometimes means letting them fall so they can learn to stand back up. "Agent Reeves," I said, and I meant every word, "I want to thank you for your courage today. What you're doing, standing here and choosing justice over the instinct to protect your child, that takes extraordinary strength." I looked at Madison. "Ms. Reeves, do you understand what just happened? Your mother, who could have used her federal connections to make this disappear, instead chose to uphold the law. She chose to honor Mrs. Walsh. She chose integrity over comfort. That is what real love looks like." Madison could barely speak through her tears. "Your Honor, I understand. I was wrong about everything. I'm so sorry." I nodded. "That's the first honest thing you've said since you walked in here. But sorry isn't enough. Sorry is just a word. Now you need to show me, and more importantly, show your mother and Mrs. Walsh that you mean it." I've been asked many times why I gave the sentence I gave. Let me explain my thinking. "Madison Claire Reeves," I said formally, "I find you guilty of assault and battery on a disabled person. This is a serious crime, made more serious by your complete lack of remorse when you first appeared before me." I paused to let that sink in. "Here is your sentence. You will serve 60 days in the Providence County Correctional Facility. You will complete 300 hours of community service working specifically with disabled students and adults. You will attend empathy training and counseling for 1 year, and you will write a formal letter of apology to Mrs. Walsh to be read in this courtroom, followed by a face-to-face meeting." Madison was nodding, accepting each part, but I wasn't finished. "You will also create a video apology to be posted publicly, explaining what you did and why it was wrong. You will speak to high school assemblies about privilege, entitlement, and the consequences of believing you're above the rules. And you will write a 5,000-word essay on disability rights and why all people deserve dignity and respect." Why did I structure the sentence this way? Because punishment without education is just revenge. I wanted Madison to not only pay for what she did, but to understand why it was wrong and to help others learn from her mistakes. Agent Reeves spoke up. "Your Honor, I'd like to add something. Madison will be moving out of my home after she completes her sentence. She's 19 years old. It's time she learns independence and understands that respect is earned, not given because of who your parents are." Madison looked at her mother with complete devastation, but Agent Reeves's voice remained firm. "It's time to grow up, Madison." I turned to Eleanor Walsh. "Mrs. Walsh, would you like to say anything?" The teacher stood slowly, using her cane, and what she said next showed me the true meaning of grace. "Your Honor, I don't want this young woman's life ruined. I want her to understand that every person she meets, disabled or not, young or old, powerful or powerless, deserves basic human kindness. If she learns that, then everything that happened will have meaning." After what Madison had done to her, after the pain and humiliation she'd suffered, Eleanor Walsh was offering not revenge, but wisdom. I addressed Madison one final time. "Ms. Reeves, Mrs. Walsh just showed you more grace than you showed her. I suggest you spend your time in custody thinking about what kind of person you want to be." Court is adjourned. As the officers approached to take Madison into custody, Agent Reeves walked to her daughter. I watched this moment carefully because it captured everything this case was about. They stood face to face for a moment. Then Agent Reeves pulled Madison into a tight hug. "I love you," she whispered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "And I love you enough to let you face this. You'll survive it, and you'll be better because of it. Madison sobbed into her mother's shoulder. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I know, baby. Now prove it. The officers led Madison away. Agent Reeves stood there, watching her daughter disappear through the courtroom doors, tears streaming down her face. I approached her and extended my hand. You did the right thing. She nodded, her voice breaking. Doesn't make it hurt any less. No, I agreed, but it makes it worth it. Why I'm telling you this story. Before the courtroom emptied, I made one final statement, and I want to share it with you now because it's the reason I'm telling you this story. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, what you witnessed today isn't just about one case. It's about the choice we all face when someone we love does wrong. Do we enable them? Do we make excuses? Or do we love them enough to hold them accountable? I looked at Agent Reeves, still standing there with tears on her face. Agent Reeves could have made this disappear. One phone call, and this case might never have made it to my courtroom. Instead, she chose justice. She chose Mrs. Walsh. She chose the values she's dedicated her life to defending. That is courage. That is integrity. That is what real parenting looks like. The courtroom erupted in applause. I saw Eleanor Walsh walk over to Agent Reeves and extend her hand. Your daughter is lucky to have a mother like you, Mrs. Walsh said. Agent Reeves shook her hand, overcome with emotion. She'll learn, Walsh replied gently. And when she does, she'll make you proud. And 6 months later. Now let me tell you the end of this story because it's why I believe in redemption. 6 months later, Madison Reeves walked out of the Providence County Correctional Facility. She was a different person. She had lost her arrogance and found humility. Her 300 hours working with disabled students had turned into ongoing volunteer work that continued long after her sentence was complete. She apologized to Eleanor Walsh in a private meeting that both women described as healing. Mrs. Walsh became a mentor to Madison, teaching her things that no courtroom could teach, about resilience, about grace, about what true strength looks like. Madison's video apology went viral, over 2 million views, and young people across the country saw what real accountability looks like. Agent Reeves attended every one of Madison's counseling sessions, not because she had to, but because she wanted to support her daughter's genuine transformation. Their relationship, broken by that day in court, slowly rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. And Madison Reeves, the entitled young woman who once said, "My mother is FBI, nothing's going to happen to me," now works as an advocate for disability rights, using her story to teach others about privilege, accountability, and redemption. The lesson. I've been asked many times what I learned from this case. Here's what I'll tell you. Real love isn't protecting people from consequences. It's supporting them through the consequences they need to become better. Agent Reeves could have called in favors. She could have hired even better lawyers. She could have made this case disappear. But she loved her daughter too much to rob her of the lesson she needed to learn. Mrs. Walsh could have demanded the maximum penalty. She could have held on to her anger, but she chose grace and gave Madison a path to redemption. And Madison, she could have continued down the path of entitlement and arrogance. But when faced with real consequences and real love, she chose to change. That's the story I wanted to share with you today, because it's not just about one case in one courtroom. It's about all of us, about how we respond when people we love make mistakes, about whether we enable or empower, about whether we choose comfort or courage. In my 30 years on this bench, I've learned that justice without compassion is cruelty, but compassion without accountability is enabling. The art of being a judge and a parent and a human being is finding the balance between the two. That's what Agent Maria Reeves did that day in my courtroom. That's what Eleanor Walsh did when she offered grace. And that's what Madison Reeves did when she chose to change. Justice served, lessons learned, lives transformed. And that's why I keep coming to work every day.